So you want to play Sythis Harvest Hand? Well, then I'm going to teach you a thing or two about Enchantress decks. But first, don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date with all the newest deck techs. Sythis reads, Sythis Harvest Hand. A green and a white for a legendary enchantment creature Nymph 1/2. When you cast an enchantment spell, you gain 1 life and draw a card. Sythis is what the Magic community refers to as an Enchantress. Enchantress cards are cards that draw a card whenever you cast an enchantment. They create a powerful engine where you draw into more gas and gain value off of playing many enchantments. It is not an exaggeration to say people waited for years to get a card like Sythis in these colors, and we're glad to have them around. Other enchantresses include Enchantress's Presence, 2 and a green for an enchantment. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, draw a card, which is a non-creature version of the Enchantress effect that can survive many board wipes. An absolute auto-include in an Enchantress deck. Just be careful, as whenever you play an enchantment, you have to draw a card with this, since it doesn't use the wording, you may draw a card. Running out of cards in your deck is a real possibility, so don't forget that. Eidolon of Blossoms is a 2 green and a green, 2/2 enchantment creature spirit with Constellation. Whenever Eidolon of Blossoms or another enchantment enters a battlefield under your control, draw a card. Satyr Enchanter, 1 a green and a white for a 2/2 Satyr Druid. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, draw a card. Mesa Enchantress is 1 a white and a white for a creature Human Druid 0/2. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you may draw a card. Verduran Enchantress is 1 a green and a green for a Human Druid 0/2. Whenever you play an enchantment spell, you may draw a card. And Sythis Champion, 2 and a green for a 1/3 Human Warrior, Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Sythis Champion and draw a card, which is a great addition to the deck since it draws us cards, but also beefs itself up throughout the game. Beefing up big beaters is one of the better strategies to close out a game. As such, we run a multitude of effects that allow us to have giant creatures, such as All That Glitters, 1 and a white for an enchantment aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment you control. This effect is great since it allows us to turn one creature into a giant threat. Most games will have a ton of enchantments out, so expect this to get out of hand quickly. Ancestral Mask is a 2 and a green enchantment aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 for each other enchantment on the battlefield. For 1 extra mana, Ancestral Mask is a better fit for this deck. Giving your creatures +2/+2 is great. Sorry, All That Glitters, you're not the all-star here. Helm of the Gods is a 1 mana artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control, with an equip cost of 1. Helm of the Gods is like the past 2 cards, but with the advantage that it can be swapped out to other creatures and doesn't get lost to a board wipe. Nettlecyst is a 3 mana artifact equipment with Living Weapon. When this equipment enters the battlefield, create a 0/0 black Phyrexian Germ creature token, then attach it to this. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment you control, with an equip cost of 2. Nettlecyst is similar to Helm of the Gods, but also counts artifacts including itself. That isn't super relevant, but redundancy is great, and the fact that it comes with a body is an A+. Catilda, Dawnheart Martyr, is a 1 white legendary creature spirit warlock, XX. Flying, lifelink, protection from vampires. Catilda, Dawnheart's Martyr's power and toughness are each equal to the number of permanents you control that are spirits and or enchantments, with a disturb cost of 3 a white and a white. Flying is good. Lifelink makes this card great, and protection from vampires is just kinda there. More importantly, though, is the power and toughness equal to enchantments and spirits we control. The spirits part comes in later and is actually somewhat relevant in this deck. Destiny Spinner is a 1 and a green for a 2/3 human. Creature and enchantment spells you control can't be countered. Pay 3 and a green. Target land you control becomes an XX elemental creature with trample and haste until end of turn, where X is the number of enchantments you control. It's still a land. Destiny Spinner can turn our spare lands into threats. The ability to make creatures and enchantments uncounterable is just gravy at this point. Then there's Celestial Ancient. 3 a white and a white for a 3/3 elemental with flying. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Celestial Ancient is great because it can turn our entire board into massive creatures, which becomes relevant with all the token-producing cards we're going to start running. Just like Court of Grace. 2 a white and a white. Enchantment, when Court of Grace enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. If you're the monarch, create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying instead. This card creates spirits and potentially angels. We're happy to get either because angels are big beaters on their own, and spirits help Catilda and our next card, Hallowed Haunting. 2 a white and a white for an enchantment. As long as you control 7 or more enchantments, creatures you control have flying and vigilance. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, create a white spirit cleric creature token with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of spirits you control. Hallowed Haunting can get out of hand very quickly, even just 4 spirits turns into 16 damage out of nowhere, and the Anthem effect is a great addition. Sigil of the Empty Throne is 3 a white and a white for an enchantment. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying. Sigil of the Empty Throne is a classic token creator for this deck. 4/4s with flying are sweet. Not really much more to say there. Archon of Sun's Grace is 2 a white and a white for a 3/4 Archon with flying and lifelink. Pegasus creatures you control have lifelink. Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 white Pegasus creature token with flying. Another token producing card that also gives the tokens it creates lifelink. Lifelink is really solid in this deck so that we can stabilize against aggro decks. Ajani's Chosen is 2 a white and a white for a creature cat soldier. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 white cat creature token. If that enchantment is an aura, you may attach it to the token. Not anything wild here, just a solid way to make bodies, which we're happy to have more of. Now that we have a bunch of cards that care about us playing enchantments, we need to cover what enchantments we actually run in the deck, such as ramp cards. Utopia Sprawl, for 1 green, is an enchantment aura, Enchant Forest. As Utopia Sprawl enters the battlefield, choose a color. Whenever Enchanted Forest is tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional 1 mana of the chosen color. Utopia Sprawl is a great early game card to help us ramp, but don't forget late game, it still draws us cards for only 1 mana. Sometimes that can be a huge boon. Wild Growth is 1 green for an enchantment aura, Enchant Land. Whenever Enchanted Land is tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional green. Wild Growth is basically Utopia Sprawl number 2. They're a bit different, but not enough where it's worth talking about further. Next comes removal in the form of enchantments. While we do run other removal, the big focus here is that these deal with problematic cards while also drawing us cards. Kenrith's Transformation is 1 and a green for an enchantment aura, enchant creature. When Kenrith's Transformation enters the battlefield, draw a card. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a green elk creature with base power and toughness 3/3. It loses all other card types and creature types. A 3/3 can be annoying to deal with, but nowhere near as bad as whatever you enchanted with Kenrith's Transformation. Grasp of Fate, for 1 a white and a white, is an enchantment. When Grasp of Fate enters the battlefield, for each opponent, exile up to 1 non-land permanent that player controls until Grasp of Fate leaves the battlefield. Grasp of Fate was made for multiplayer games. Hitting cards from all of your opponents is sweet, but do note that it does paint a giant target on your back. Darksteel Mutation, for 1 and a white, is an enchantment aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature is an insect artifact creature with base power and toughness 0/1 and has indestructible and loses all other abilities, card types, and creature types. An indestructible 0/1 that loses abilities. I love how useless this can make a commander. Just remember that it doesn't lose its counter, so sometimes you end up facing a beefy bug. Song of the Dryads, for 2 and a green, is an enchantment aura, enchant permanent. Enchanted permanent is a colorless forest land. Now this is the removal we're looking for. Turning something into a forest is awesome. It can't block, it can't swing in, it makes a card about as useless as we can manage. And it hits non-creature cards as well. With all these enchantments around, we still need a way to get our engine running. We accomplish that by running cards that protect our board as well as ourselves, such as Privileged Position. For 2, a hybrid green-white, a hybrid green-white, and a hybrid green-white. Enchantment, other permanents you control have hexproof. Other permanents gain hexproof. It doesn't die to board wipe. All in all, absolutely amazing card. Seer of Safety is a 4 and a white for an enchantment. Creatures can't attack you or a planeswalker you control unless their controller pays X for each of those creatures, where X is the number of enchantments you control. Just from reading this card, it should be apparent that our opponents often just won't be able to attack us at all. This card is especially good against go-wide decks like tokens. Sterling Grove is a green and a white for an enchantment. Other enchantments you control have Shroud. They can't be the targets of spells or abilities. And pay 1, sacrifice Sterling Grove, search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, shuffle that card, and put it on top. Keep in mind, Shroud does mean that we can't target our enchantments either, which is admittedly a bit of a bummer, but still too strong not to run. And an emergency button tutor is pretty great to have as well. Ghostly Prison is 2 and a white for an enchantment. Creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each attacking creature they control. Ghostly Prison is worse Sphere of Safety in this deck, but comes down 2 turns earlier, which is good. It also stacks with Sphere of Safety, so keep that in mind. Solitary Confinement is probably our best protective enchantment, in that it's 2 and a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Solitary Confinement unless you discard a card. Skip your draw step, and you have Shroud. You can't be the targets of spells or abilities. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. Now this is really a way to keep ourselves safe. Giving Shroud to ourselves is a really strong, as well as getting rid of damage. The downside of getting rid of our draw step and having to discard is a non-issue in a deck that's all about drawing cards. This one is a must-run. Finally, that brings us to our alternate win condition. For when the beatdown isn't enough, we still have Approach of the Second Sun. 6 and a white for a sorcery. If the spell was cast from your hand and you've cast another spell named Approach of the Second Sun this game, you win the game. Otherwise, put Approach of the Second Sun into its owner's library 7th from the top and you gain 7 life. I think you can see where this is going. We play it, play some enchantments, draw it again super fast, and win the game on the spot. It's mana intensive to do so, but totally worth it. And that's it. That's the deck. If you want to see the full deck, there will be a link below for the full list. Did you think of any cards that I missed? If so, leave them in the comments below. If you enjoy what I do, consider subscribing to my Patreon, but even if you just subscribe to my channel, know that it's plenty enough for me. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful day.